This sketch took about an hour to produce. I used a high megapixel camera to photograph it and download it into the computer faster than scanning with pros and cons. Pro, the lines aren't as washed out. Cons, distorted lines blend into the background. I skew the image so it looks the way I want, closer to what was in my head. The contrast is increased so the lines stand apart, ready for the next step. This step takes some time. I paint using a Wacom Bamboo tablet and pen in Adobe CS5 Illustrator. I don't use the trace feature in order to get a more naturally hand-drawn look, tweaking the settings and using the pen pressure feature. Ink like this takes roughly another hour. Because the color of the paper is pinkish at this point and the ink is black, setting the layer to multiply in Photoshop isn't enough, so I cut away everything that isn't black. I still set the layer to multiply to prevent any pixels messing up the clean lines. I still want to use the sketch layer, no need to throw it away. It will be repurposed for color. I begin rough cutting around the form. The finished background for color and effects, this took about 20 minutes. What the color background layer looks like with the ink layer made invisible. I duplicate the color background layer and cut the ink lines out of the duplicate. This creates my shading and effects layer. You want a color background layer because without it you'll find yourself with those pesky pixel issues messing up your clean lines. I change the color of the color background layer. Here you can see it with the ink layer. The shading and effects layer is currently invisible. With the color background layer set, I begin adding effects. A shading adds dimension to the shading and effects layer. I also add an effect to the flames by cutting them out of the ink layer and giving them a layer with a gradient of its own. The wings are now their own layer with its own settings and color. I add a pattern stones to the shading and effects layer and tweak until I think it looks enough like scales. The different settings found among bevel and emboss, color, and pattern allow the stones to fade or become more pronounced as I want them to appear. Created another layer to fit between the shading and effects layer and the topmost ink layer. I paint in Photoshop using the paintbrush tool with pressure setting in white only on the body and feathers. The flames are colored in their own layer using a custom gradient. Duplicate a merged layer of the image and enlarge it in the background. Also reduce the opacity to half and added a tint of color. I also sign my work at this point so people know where to find me on the web. You can either find me on DeviantArt by looking up Twilight Rabbit, DOTCOM, or properly Twilight Rabbit with an actual dot this time, .com.